So just from an outline perspective, I know this is a short session. So what we'll be really covering is the pay equity landscape, the business case for change, get into a little bit about pay parity, software solution, look at some success stories. And, if we have time, we can get into some questions. But really, I think core focus would really just be um, the pay equity landscape and what the business case is for change. Um, there's a clear imperative for change. I mean, we've been seeing this for a long time now, where organizations are doing pay equity audits, or were doing pay equity audits once a year, maybe once every 2 years, and really the idea there was that, hey, we wanted to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So really ensuring that pay equity is an ethical imperative, and that's why organizations really kind of focused on it. Whether they were doing it once a year, once every 2 years, it was just different. But at least that was one of the principal reasons as to why organizations were looking at conducting pay equity analyses, making changes, remediating, et cetera, et cetera. But then came the point, and this has also been around for quite some time, has been the legal imperative, where we know that globally, not just in the US, but globally, there's a lot of different organizations that have come under attack, whether it's through a regulatory agency or direct to litigation, but really about inequities, about pay inequities, hiring inequities, promotion inequities, all sorts of different issues. And organizations started to realize that, yep, we gotta conduct an analysis proactively, just to ensure that if there's any kind of issues, we can mitigate it before there's millions and millions of dollars of class action lawsuits that occur. It's always been, it was an ethical imperative. It still is an ethical imperative. It was a legal imperative. It still is a legal imperative for a lot of organizations, if not all. And the other thing now kind of coming off in the last 2 or 3 years is that it's becoming a business imperative too, right? So there was the ethical component, there's the legal component, and then we started to see a shift on the business imperative side of things, which was with pay transparency laws going into effect, a lot of candidates applying to different organizations. There were surveys conducted where a lot of candidates said, like, yep, I will not, as a candidate, apply to a role that does not have the pay range publicly disclosed. So it became a business imperative, not just for attracting employees or candidates to join the organization, but also to retain employees within the organization. So, survey was conducted, multiple organizations participated, multiple individuals participated, and it was about job postings that had pay ranges publicly disclosed had 50% more applicants, and that was a very interesting metric to go with. So it's become even a business imperative in the last 2 or 3 years, if not slightly more. But it's become a business imperative. So going back, it's always been an ethical imperative. It has been, it still is an ethical imperative. It's always been a legal imperative. It still is a legal imperative. And over the last 2 or 3 years, it's become a business imperative. Just seeing overall better retention rates, better applicant rates, and just better overall business sense, bottom line, top line. It's affecting all of that. But now, over the last year, I would say, it's become a compliance imperative. Now, last year when we used to talk to organizations, it was all about, it's ethical, it's legal, it's business. And all of a sudden, this year, the conversations have completely changed, where it's now adding on the layer of compliance. With the EU directive getting passed, organizations have to get ready for that by 2026. Individual countries have to adopt the EU directive and come up with their own how how they're going to enforce it, et cetera, et cetera. But even before the EU directive, there were so many different jurisdictions around the world that already had some sort of either a collection of pay data requirement or collection and analyses of pay data or collection analyses and reporting of pay data or just even transparency requirements. So countries like UK have a UK gender pay gap report, France has their own version of pay data reporting, Switzerland, Germany, Spain, Italy. So there's all these different countries in EU. Australia has their own version. Within the US, there's different states. You have Illinois, California, and Minnesota coming online. So in addition to all of these different states in the US, there's all this pay transparency requirements. So different states are saying now, hey, you got to start posting your ranges publicly. There's ban on salary histories, et cetera, et cetera. So it's become a compliance imperative. It's just not as easy anymore as like, oh, if I do a global pay equity analysis for my organization and I start to remediate, yep, you're checking the box off on the ethical imperative, you're checking the box off on the legal imperative, the business imperative, but are you checking the box on compliance imperative? Because there are jurisdiction-specific pay equity analyses. Certain jurisdictions are very strict about how they want you to group employees. How do they want you to build the statistical model or the regression model? What wage influencing factors are allowed in that model? They're very kind of strict about that. So even just understanding, what my compliance looks like from that jurisdiction lens adds another layer of complexity on this global proactive pay equity analyses. So as this list is constantly growing, there's different ways that applicability for an organization can be conducted on whether or not you have to comply with these regulations. But that's a whole different conversation. But in just a quick summary, it's really principally determined based on your employee count in that jurisdiction, whether or not you're a federal contractor with that country or jurisdiction, and whether or not you're a private organization or a public organization. So, those are some kind of tidbits that can be used to identify whether or not these regulations are applicable to your organization. So when we talk about pay equity standards globally, we talk about three main pay equity frameworks. So there's always been the concept of equal pay for equal work. This is the US federal law. There's the equal pay for comparable work. That's the EU directive, that's US state laws. There's other countries that kind of talk about comparable work. And it's really employees performing substantially similar work with respect to skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. Then you have this fairly new concept in the US, but very established concept in EU and other countries, which is equal pay for work of equal value, right? So that's been something that's discussed in the EU directive and some other jurisdictions. Even within the US, there's one particular state that kind of touches upon the pay equity framework that talks about equal pay for work of equal value. So now these three different frameworks, obviously the one on the left is really the US federal framework, but more focus has been either on the comparable work framework or the work of equal value framework. And this is where organizations now need to start thinking about when they're conducting pay equity analyses, how and what framework applies to your organization. And this could frankly differ by jurisdiction too. And then the question becomes, how do you layer this onto your global compensation policy or your global pay equity work? How do you factor this into remediation? How do you factor this into giving pay increases? It's just kind of the compliance imperative is just adding a lot of complexity to pay equity and compensation in general. We talk about the evolution of laws really from existence to enforcement. A good way to kind of think about it, laws have always existed. I mean, if you think about the US law, it's been around since 1963. A lot of different countries have had very strict laws, and it's been there forever. I mean, which organization wants to be discriminative when it comes to pay, right? So no one does. And these laws have existed, but now what's happening is with these pay transparency requirements, these reporting requirements, there's enforcement that's happening. So it's like really a freeway that has that there's a speed limit on the freeway that's always been there, but there was no one enforcing it. But now you have enforcement happening on that freeway. So that's kind of like an analogy that I would use when it comes to pay transparency and reporting requirements. Laws have always existed. It's just there was no enforcement. And now with these pay transparency and reporting requirements, there's a mechanism for enforcing these different laws. So it's even becoming important for organizations to start factoring pay equity into their day-to-day compensation work. Now, we talk about the CART framework. This is very important to understand. The global pay data or pay equity, pay data compliance really falls into one of these combinations. So certain countries just require you to collect the data, pay data, and sit on it, not do anything with it, but sit on it. And when asked to produce that data, you have to produce that data. So you're just sitting on that data. Some jurisdictions say, nope, you collect the data and you analyze the data, and then you sit on the analyses until asked for, okay? Some jurisdictions say, well, collect the data, analyze the data. And what do you mean by analyze the data? You could either have do a pay gap assessment, which is what the median average pay gap is when it comes to gender or different protected classes. Maybe you're doing quartile determination. And then certain jurisdictions will say, hey, go all out and do a pay equity analysis like the EU directive contemplates. Or the state of Illinois in the US contemplates that. So essentially you're collecting the data, you're analyzing the data, and then you're reporting to certain regulatory agencies around that, right? So the reporting requirement might just be either some sort of pay data that's being submitted to the regulatory agency, or some kind of report that's being published on the website, or some kind of communication that needs to be sent out to the employees. So that would be, collecting the data, analyzing the data, or reporting on that data. And then you could have some jurisdictions that are saying, hey, collect the data, analyze the data, report on that data, and then be transparent about your ranges. So, that could, that some jurisdictions talk about that. And then all sorts of combinations can happen, right? So there could be collection and reporting only, collection and analyses, collection, analyses, reporting, just transparency requirements. So, but everything really kind of falls into this CART framework. And that's what organizations need to start determining which jurisdictions, number one, apply to you, and then what is the requirement under that jurisdiction. So if I'm going transparent with my wages, I have to make sure that I've done an assessment, I've done an analysis internally to ensure that no one can challenge this. There's no wage compression that can be created within the organization. If I post a range publicly from, let's say $80,000 to $100,000 for a role, and I have incumbents in that role that are at 75,000, 70,000, that could create pay compression. And if those employees look at those ranges, that could have a severe impact on not just their morale, but also someone challenging the organization. So, it's very important, whatever you're doing here, reporting, transparency, some kind of analyses. I always say if you're doing analyses, might as well do it the right way, and tick off all of the boxes, make sure your methodological approach is 100% succinct and comprehensive. But whatever you're doing here, you just want to make sure that you understand what is happening within the organization. So going on to the next kind of slide, and then, this is where we talk about, we had the ethical imperative, legal imperative, business imperative, and now the compliance imperative. And why is this making it so complex? Because if we take an example of Illinois, which says, hey, just analyze your employees that are within state lines, you do that, and let's say it indicates like John Doe is impacted and you need to remediate John Doe That's what the regression analysis is showing. And you remediate John Doe without taking into account similar positions in maybe other states, other countries. You might have just created a global pay equity issue, or even made your pay equity worse, because you haven't factored in these other employees that are in similar roles or comparable roles, or roles with work of equal value in maybe different jurisdictions, because you've only analyzed the Illinois employees. So, while you're doing the analyses for Illinois, that's very important to make sure you're in compliance and to get that pay equity certification. It's also important to simultaneously run a global analysis such that now you can make a very informed decision on what that remediation should look like. So that's why it's becoming even more complex, and it's important for organizations to layer on the pay equity regulations with their global pay equity analyses and then make decisions. So what does that mean? Well, if you're telling me that I got to run a pay equity analysis globally, I gotta then run it through the Illinois lens. I then gotta run it through the California lens, run it through UK, run it through other jurisdictions. Are you telling me that I gotta run multiple analyses? Yes, maybe at times you might have to run multiple analyses simultaneously. Well, what does that mean? Well, maybe the old approach doesn't work, right? So the approach of spreadsheets, PDF documents, Word documents, it just does not work. Using a spreadsheet or using data in the old approach, it might take like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get the analyses. Sometimes we've even heard like it takes months to get those analyses, depending on the size of the organization and the scope. And that could very quickly be outdated. So it just doesn't work. And what we've been telling organizations is that you got to start thinking about modernizing your pay equity by using a software that can basically do multiple analyses for you at the same time simultaneously, and layer those analyses over each other such that you have a holistic and comprehensive analysis done. So, having said that, Olivia, do we want to kick this poll question out?
Yeah. So I think we have a poll question on your screen. We here at Trusaic are really interested in learning more about how you're doing pay equity today. So we'll leave the poll up for a few minutes.
Yeah, so just the poll question, I think it'll be great to even understand. We've done this numerous times before, so this would be great to understand even, how are you doing your pay equity today? Is it using a third-party software, law firm, in-house, exploring options? Great to understand that. Give it another couple of seconds here. Getting some more results. Okay. So just from a results perspective, it seems like that there is pretty balanced number between third-party consultants and software. So that's typically what we're seeing. We're starting to see a big shift towards softwares that are integrated with HRIS systems, that are certified by HRIS systems from an integration standpoint, being utilized more often. So I'm not surprised seeing these results. For those of you that are exploring options, would highly kind of encourage you to look at software platforms that can help you really automate a lot of these things. Well, kind of moving on to really looking at when you're exploring kind of pay equity softwares, I think it's one of the things that's very important, and it's important to keep in mind, is that pay equity analyses, a lot of that data is going to be maybe sitting in your UKG platform, but when you're looking at pay data reporting, when you're looking at global pay data reporting, you might have different payroll systems that you're using around the world. And the pay data reporting data set generally is sitting in your payroll systems and not necessarily in your HRIS or HCM platforms. But then the pay equity data is generally sitting on your HCM or HRIS systems. So, as you're exploring options, I think it becomes very important to make sure that the pay equity system or the pay equity solution that you select, that you want to go forward with, should necessarily be connected with the your HRI system, and in this case, UKG system. It's very important for that seamless data integration to happen, and make sure that it's certified by UKG, the integration, because that's another important component. There's a big difference between just connecting using a third-party app to an HRIS system versus actually getting certified by the HRIS system for that integration. So there's a big difference in that. But that would help you modernize your pay equity solution, and not just modernize it, but also make your existing software really efficient and always kind of real time running the analyses. So, I want to quickly just show you what some of, as you're exploring options, I think it'll be great for you to kind of see what to be on the lookout for. I think it'll be great to kind of see some of the analytics that you should be looking out for. So let me just go ahead and really share my screen here. So with respect to when you're exploring options, I think some important thing, obviously I talked about integration, that's very, very important. But when it comes to EU directive, it's very important to understand what your unadjusted pay gap is. Just overall, even in the US, I think it's very important to understand that. And then what is your adjusted pay gap? Because that would really tell you whether or not you need to move forward with the second part of EU directive, for example, or even in the US, how much of it is an issue that you need to resolve. So definitely kind of focus on, whether or not you can see the unadjusted and adjusted pay gaps by groups. It's very important. Make sure that the system has these two different calculations, right? So there's the class effect only predictions, there's the class plus individual effect predictions. Very important to get into that. The other thing I would highlight is getting details around what your model fit is very important. You don't want to be in a situation where it's saying that, yep, you don't have any pay disparity issues, but the model fit is just really bad. That in itself will not be defensible at all. So you want to get insights into that. You want to be able to also see your distribution, how many are maybe 2 standard deviations away from the predicted compensation, 3 standard deviations, 1 standard deviations. You want to make sure that that's happening. You want to make sure that the system does not let you select the reference group because that could cause reverse discrimination issues. So you don't want to always select a reference group just randomly. You should let the system kind of really select the reference group based on your data. I think it's very important. But also some jurisdictions do require you to force a reference group. So it should be flexible enough to have that capability of selecting a reference group, but by default, it should really select the reference group for you. I would say even going deeper into looking at what the employee prediction should be, so the ability to kind of see those 2 different predictions. There are going to be very different strategies that are going to be employed. I think you should definitely get insights into that. You should also get insights into, what is it that you're kind of compensating for, what the data is showing, because this could really help you streamline your compensation policy, where you might be thinking that compensation policy says X, but actually the data is showing Y. So having that insight and then taking decisions into bringing the 2 together as to what is documented versus what's happening in reality, I think that becomes very important. Obviously, root cause, understanding what's causing the pay equity issue would be very important. You should have an insight into how do you create a remediation plan. That would be very, very important. So you should be getting insights into that. Make sure that whatever system you end up selecting has the concept of ROSA in there, which is a remediation optimization spend analysis. That's very, very important to take into account as you're building a remediation strategy, because it does end up running the model, thousands of times, or sometimes even 100,000 times, to give you that answer of, if I spend $1 in remediation, what is my return on investment going to be? So it's very important to take that into account. And then finally, just getting a high-level view, getting your trends. I think that would be important to just kind of be able to talk about what's happening within the organization, or even just share that information with different stakeholders if you want to do that, right? So the power of the software, like I said, becomes, doesn't matter what software you select, but as long as it checks all the boxes of defensibility, comprehensibility, integration. One other important factor of software is that you can run multiple analyses at the same time, right? So that's very important to consider. But as you're evaluating it, just make sure that it's not, one pitfall of software evaluations are always like, oh, which software looks very swanky or looks really great or has a great UI. That's a pitfall. Make sure that you're evaluating software is based on their comprehensive methodological approach. I think it's very important to focus on that. So, I just wanted to kind of share that detail with you. And I think we're right at time. So, we'll open it up for any questions. See if you have any questions from the attendees here.
Yeah, thank you, Anuj. So as Anuj mentioned, we're now going to begin answering questions that were submitted during today's presentation. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions to the Q&A on the left-hand side of the slides. But our first question in the meantime is, how can members of the audience see the PayParity software solution for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, we'd be more than happy to kind of show you the software. Here's my contact information. You can always reach out to me. We can set up a much more detailed demonstration of the system. And, but I'm hoping that what we kind of showed today gives you an idea of what a software around, can do. But definitely reach out if there's, interest in looking at the solution or discussing even your own unique situation and how can the software really help you. Here's my contact information. Just reach out to me.
Thank you, Anuj. And I see we're right up at the 11:30 mark, so we'd like to thank everyone for attending our webinar today, and special thanks to Anuj for lending his time and expertise today. And as a reminder for our audience, we'll be sharing a link to this console where you can view the session on demand, access resources, schedule a meeting, and more. Also feel free to reach out to Anuj if you have any questions via his contact information on the screen. On behalf of Trusaic, I want to thank you again for your participation and have a great rest of your day.